Okay, on one side, you've got these young, budding developers rocking out. But there's also a serious side. Some developers are tackling subjects rarely explored in gaming.
Serious game I really liked is the one called September 12th. It's about the U.S. military going to the Middle East, and they see this city full of civilians, but then there's also a terrorist. Your goal as the U.S. military is to kill this terrorist without killing any civilians, right? Which is a noble goal, and which is what we believe the U.S. military is doing, right? So we play a game and we try really hard to hit the terrorists without hitting the civilians. Sometimes you accidentally killed one, then the other civilian comes by and they get pissed, they want to revenge, they turn into terrorists. What you thought you are doing is actually creating more terrorists, which I think has a very strong political message in it.
I recently played one called The Baron, and the subject matter was very mature. It was about a man grappling with the fact that he had sexually abused his daughter.
We know that indie games have the freedom to be as out there as the game developers want to go. But why not take that talent and those fresh ideas to the big publishers? I mean, is there no way for a regular dude to get his game made?
If I'm Joe Schmo, there's no way a publisher is putting out my game.
I don't have the money, I don't have the staff.
It's really hard to get a game company to publish sort of the idea that you come up with your friends, but it's getting easier.
With your larger developers and your larger publishers, of course, you're dealing with teams of individuals, you're dealing with licenses for ideas, for characters.
I've got to have the game basically done if I'm going to bring it to a publisher and say, hey, publish my game. If I've shipped 30 titles, then there's a good chance. Like if I'm David Jaffe and I walk in somewhere and I'm like, hey, I got a game idea, then they're definitely going to pick that up. But not me, Josh Glazer.
So the process of creating a game as a AAA company, say EA, Activision, etc., is very bureaucratic.
They tend to want to make it play like other games that people like.
There's no focus groups in the indie scene, and there's no initial funding in the indie scene, and it usually is one guy in his garage or 3 guys in their bedroom.
Why is any company in business? It's to make money, right?
The sequel syndrome is a rough one. It's a real rough one. I know people who've been working on the 5th generation of the same title, and you've got to imagine these guys are basically working on the same game for like 10 years. Bungie made Halo 3, they made Halo 2, they made Halo 1, they've been making Halo for a long time.
It's easy, I think, for a commercial game to fall into a trap of, hey, we have to pump this out in a really short timeline for a large budget, but at the same time, a budget that's not going to afford us a lot of leeway.
Their designers have gotten really burned out on that.
The big budget game industry is very similar to the film industry, and not only the film industry of today, but even the film industry in the late 90s, where independent films were really, the Pulp Fictions, the Quentin Tarantinos, the Paul Rodriguez's, all these guys out there that are saying, we don't need $1 million budgets to make good movies.
If you're making a James Bond movie, there's only so much you can do to change up the James Bond formula, because that formula has made a lot of movies make a lot of money. And if you're the person who screws up the formula, there are going to be some very important people very pissed at you.
I think what indie films and indie games do is they give a forum for people who normally couldn't make games.
The biggest obstacle I had to overcome making RoboBlitz was working without sleeping for no money.
You've got sort of the garage games inventors, the guys that, have Mountain Dew cans around them and empty pizza boxes that just sit there and program code and, create a game because that's what they like to do.
When you're an indie developer, you just need a lot of Mountain Dew.
If you're going to make a game, you just have to, take anything you can get. If you're technically inclined, start programming. If not, look to Flash or GameMaker, or look to your friend who is technically inclined.
Make it from the ground up, and that eliminates a lot of why it takes so long to make games and why sometimes games don't turn out the way that you expected them to.
You just got to make yourself do it, and then I think the momentum will take care of the rest.
Indie games are here and they're only getting bigger. But is there an actual indie games movement?
I don't know if I would go so far as to call it a movement, because I don't think there's any group of people, maybe there are.
There's definitely an independent games movement. I mean, there's people who go to talks about independent games, and there's the whole IGF and people who just live independent games, and they're like, I'm going to make these small, self-contained, couple level games that just show off my concept, and they're going to be beautiful in their gameplay, and I'll talk about my new techniques, and that's just what I'm going to do. And those people all get together and they talk about it, and they're awesome because that's where a lot of new technology comes from.
Now, I think there's an indie games movement. I mean, the indie developers think there's an indie games movement. And the mainstream developers, I think, too, recognize that. They're at the Game Developers Choice Awards, which is sort of like the Academy Awards for games. They have the Independent Game Awards. There's also the Independent Game Summit, which goes along with the Game Developers Conference, the major conference for game developers. And I think it's very much being discussed in the industry, and the figures in the independent game industry are gaining notoriety in the mainstream industry very much.
But I can't think of anybody I know who's like, okay, the big corporations, I just want to make self-finance games, because that's hard. It's a hard life, and if you can get money from someone, take it, I mean, yes, you don't want them to control your creative, process.
It seems like indie games are just really healthy lately, and we're seeing more ways to develop indie games with GameMaker and Flash and other pieces of software, and more ways to distribute indie games, not just on the PC, but on the Xbox and on the PlayStation and on the Wii.
The future of independent gaming is the past of independent gaming. It'll be guys doing creative stuff. Maybe some girls doing creative stuff in the future. That would be cool.
Right now is the great time for people who wants to make video game different, come out and try.
That is it, kids. Indie games, Gametrotting. Thank you for watching. I would love to hang out, do a little bit more of this, but I'm going home to play Sequel, the game. Part 2, Return to Sequel Island. The follow-up to Sequel vs. Prequel.